The alarm went off at 3 in the morning. Lieutenant Jake Morrison jumped from his chair at the monitoring station near Neptune. His coffee spilled across the desk as strange sounds filled his headphones. Something was out there in the dark space, and it was calling for help. Jake pressed buttons on his computer, trying to understand the alien words. The machine worked slowly, changing the foreign sounds into English. What he heard made his blood run cold. Someone was dying out there, and they were begging anyone who could hear them to help. The voice was soft and scared. It spoke about a ship full of families, thousands of them, including children. They were under attack by someone called the Krathiks. Their shields were breaking. They had no weapons because they never believed in war. Now they were going to die unless someone saved them. Jake recorded everything and sent it straight to Earth Command. He knew this was bigger than him. This was something that the whole human government needed to know about. The message kept playing over and over, getting weaker each time. Jake could hear the fear in that alien voice, could almost see the families huddled together waiting for death. Within an hour, all the important military leaders on Earth were in a big meeting room. Admiral Catherine Hayes stood in front of huge screens showing where the alien ship was floating in space. She was a tall woman with gray hair and hard eyes that had seen many battles. Around her, generals and admirals argued about what to do. Captain Lisa Chen from Intelligence explained what they knew. The aliens calling for help were called Velen. They ate only plants and never hurt anyone. They were running away from their dying home planet, looking for a new place to live. The ones attacking them were called Krathiks, mean creatures who had been taking over planets for many years. The Velen had no chance against them. Admiral Hayes asked how much time the Velen had left. Lisa said maybe 36 hours before their shields failed completely. Then the Krathiks would tear their ship apart and kill everyone inside. The room went quiet. Humans had only met aliens 7 years ago. The galaxy had been surprised by humans because Earth was such a dangerous planet. Most aliens came from gentle worlds with soft weather and calm oceans. Earth had earthquakes, hurricanes, volcanoes, and extreme seasons. The galaxy called planets like Earth deathworlds. Only the strongest creatures could survive there. General Paul Drake spoke up. He said this was not their fight. Humans barely knew these alien species. Why should Earth get involved in their wars? If humans helped the Velen, the Krathiks would become their enemies too. Admiral Hayes turned to look at him. Her voice was calm but strong. She said the Velen asked for help. 12,000 innocent people were about to be killed. Did that mean nothing? General Drake argued back, saying Earth had to think about its own safety first. But Hayes kept looking at the screen showing the alien message. She thought about all the times in human history when people needed help and nobody came. She thought about all the wars on Earth, all the innocent people who died because nobody stopped the killing. Humans had fought each other for thousands of years. They knew war better than almost any other species in the galaxy. Hayes made her decision. She ordered the fleet to get ready for battle. Every available warship would leave in 6 hours. They were going to save those aliens whether some people liked it or not. The room exploded with voices. Everyone had an opinion. But Hayes raised her hand for silence. She explained that humans had spent 10,000 years fighting wars on Earth. They understood violence in ways these peaceful aliens never would. If humans were going to be part of the galaxy community, they needed to show what they believed in. Right now, that meant protecting people who could not protect themselves. Commander Daniel Wright got the orders on his ship, the Valiant. He was the captain of one of Earth's defense vessels. Daniel had read reports about the Krathiks. They were like big reptiles who believed that only the strong deserved to live. They had conquered 17 star systems and killed millions of aliens who could not fight back. As the human fleet came together in space, Daniel looked at the list of his crew members. Every man and woman on his ship had trained for combat, but none of them had ever fought in a real space battle. Human ships were built using lessons from hundreds of years of naval warfare on Earth's oceans. The ships were fast and could turn quickly. They had more weapons than most alien ships. Daniel thought about the 3,000 children on that alien colony ship. He had a daughter back on Earth. She was safe at home, probably sleeping peacefully. Those alien children were not safe. They were about to die if nobody helped them. Daniel knew what he had to do. 6 hours later, 32 human warships jumped into faster-than-light travel. They were racing toward the edge of known space to fight an enemy they had never seen before. They were going to help people they had never met. In the cargo area of the Valiant, Marines checked their weapons and armor. Sergeant Nicole Barnes was testing her powered combat suit. These suits let humans work in any environment, even in the vacuum of space or on planets that would kill normal people instantly. The suits were built to handle anything. Corporal Kevin Ross asked Nicole if they would really need to fight. Nicole looked at him with serious eyes. She said if the Krathix soldiers got onto the Valen ship, yes, they would need to fight. The Marines would have to get those civilians out alive. The human fleet rushed through the darkness of space, following the fading distress signal. Back on Earth, billions of people watched the news and waited. They did not know if their fleet would make it in time. They did not know if humans could really defeat the Krathix. Far away at the edge of human-explored space, the Velen colony ship called Harmonious Dawn floated in the dark. Its shields were flickering and failing. Fires burned inside the hull. 6 large Krathix warships surrounded it like wolves around wounded prey. The Krathix were moving in for the kill, ready to finish off the helpless aliens, but help was coming. The human fleet was coming. Earth had heard the call for help and Earth had answered. The human fleet arrived at the battle zone in a flash of light. Commander Daniel Wright looked at his screens and saw the Valen ship. It looked terrible. The hull was burned and broken in many places. Air was leaking out into space. 6 huge Krathix warships surrounded it like hunters around a dying animal. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Endeavour. She studied the enemy ships carefully. They were bigger than human ships and covered in thick armor that looked like reptile scales. She ordered her crew to open a communication channel to the Krathix commander. The screen changed to show an alien face. It looked like a giant lizard with cold golden eyes. The creature's scales were dark red and covered with scars from many battles. This was Commander Zrathok of the Krathix Dominion. Hayes introduced herself calmly. She explained that humans had received a distress call and came to help the Velen. Zrathok laughed at her. He said the Velen were prey animals and the Krathix were claiming them. He told Hayes to leave or die with the Velen. Hayes stayed calm. She made a counter-offer. The Krathix could leave now or they could learn about human military power the hard way. Zrathok laughed even harder. He said humans brought only 30 small ships against his 6 large warships. He had conquered entire star systems with fleets. Human vessels looked weak and tiny to him. Hayes gave him one last warning. She told him to stand down immediately. Zrathok called humans insects. He said the Krathix would crush them and eat their remains. Then he cut off the communication. Admiral Hayes turned to her weapons officer. She told him to show the Krathix why Earth was classified as a death world. All human ships were free to fire. She ordered them to target the enemy engines and weapon systems. Hayes wanted to disable the Krathix ships, not destroy them. This would be a lesson, not a massacre. The human fleet spread out in a strange pattern. Most alien species fought by lining up their ships in walls and shooting at each other. Humans did something completely different. Their ships moved in 3 dimensions, creating a complex pattern that made them almost impossible to hit. The ships that could survive Earth's crushing gravity could turn and accelerate in ways that would tear apart vessels from gentler worlds. The Krathix fired first. Their plasma cannons shot bright bolts of superheated gas, but the human ships were already moving, dodging with incredible speed. Computer systems predicted where the enemy would shoot and moved the ships out of the way before the weapons even fired. Commander Daniel Wright held tight to his chair as the Valiant rolled sideways, avoiding a plasma blast that would have destroyed his ship completely. He ordered his crew to return fire with railguns at full power. The Valiant's weapons fired metal rods at nearly the speed of light. The Krathix armor was built to stop energy weapons like lasers and plasma, but it did almost nothing against solid metal moving at such incredible speed. The rods punched through the first Krathix ship's hull like bullets through paper, destroying its main weapons all across the battle zone. Human ships showed fighting tactics that had been improved over thousands of years of warfare on Earth. They used crossfire, attacking from multiple angles at once. They used flanking maneuvers, coming at the enemy from the sides and back. They coordinated their attacks so perfectly that the Krathix defenses could not keep up. On his flagship, Commander Zrathok watched in shock as his fleet was taken apart piece by piece. His weapons officer shouted that this was impossible. The humans fought like demons. How could such small ships be so deadly? His second officer pulled up information about humans from the Galactic database. There was not much information, but what was there made Zrathok's blood run cold. Earth was classified as a level 9 hazard world. Humans had evolved while competing with other predator species. Their planet had tried to kill them for millions of years, and they survived by becoming even more dangerous. Zrathok suddenly understood. These were not soft aliens from gentle worlds. These were true Deathworlders. They had been forged in violence and learned to master it completely. 2 of his ships were already floating dead in space with destroyed engines. A third was venting atmosphere through multiple holes in its hull. The humans had not destroyed a single ship completely, but they had made half his force helpless with surgical precision. They were too skilled, too fast, too coordinated. Zrathok gave the order he never thought he would give. He told all ships to retreat at full speed. His pride meant nothing if his entire fleet was destroyed, but the humans were not finished. As the Krathix ships turned to run away, human vessels moved to block their escape. Admiral Hayes opened another communication channel. She told Zrathok he was not leaving yet. First, they needed to have a talk about his behavior. Zrathok snarled in anger as human ships boxed in his remaining vessels. His ships were surrounded by an enemy that moved through space like predators through water. Zrathok reminded Hayes that she said she would not destroy them. Hayes corrected him. She said she would prefer not to destroy them. Whether they left as intact ships or as floating debris was entirely up to him. She was sending people over to talk. He would receive them and discuss terms, or the battle would continue. On the Valen colony ship, Captain Mira watched the battle on her damaged sensors. Her people had never understood war or violence. They ran from their dying planet looking for peace. Instead, they found the Krathix. Now she watched as these strange humans fought with skill that both terrified and amazed her. They moved their ships like living creatures. They attacked with precision that seemed impossible. And even though the Krathix had shown no mercy, the humans were still offering them a chance to surrender. A message came through from the human fleet. The screen showed Admiral Hayes. She told Captain Mira that the area was now secure. Human medical and repair teams were preparing to come aboard. The Valen were safe now. Captain Mira felt tears running down her face. She asked Hayes why humans would risk themselves for strangers. Hayes smiled sadly. She said because someone had to do it, and because humans had been in that same position before. They knew what it felt like to need help and have nobody answer. Human shuttles launched toward both the Valen ship and the disabled Krathix vessels. The galaxy was learning something new. Humanity had entered the galactic stage not as conquerors or simple diplomats. They came as something the peaceful species never knew they needed. Warriors who chose to protect the weak instead of prey upon them. The shuttle bay of Commander Zrathok's flagship was filled with tension. Krathix warriors lined the walls holding plasma rifles. They were ordered not to shoot unless attacked. But they were ready. Zrathok stood in the center of the bay, his red scales dark with shame and anger. The human shuttle landed with a hiss. When the door opened, 4 people came out. 3 wore heavy-powered armor that made them look like walking tanks. The 4th was a woman in a simple military uniform with no armor and no visible weapons. Commander Lisa Chen walked down the ramp like she owned the ship. Behind her, Sergeant Nicole Barnes and her Marines kept their weapons pointed down, but ready to fire quickly. Lisa stopped a few meters from Zrathok, close enough to show she was not afraid, far enough to stay safe. Lisa introduced herself as an intelligence officer from Earth. She said they needed to discuss the future relationship between Krathix and humans. Zrathok's throat swelled with anger. He said humans had humiliated him and defeated him with fewer ships. Humans had no right to interfere in Krathix hunting. Lisa asked if he called it hunting. She pointed out that he was attacking refugees, civilians, and children. Zrathok said that the strong survive and the weak die. This was the way of the universe. Lisa said not anymore. Not in this part of space. Not while humanity was watching. She pulled out a tablet computer and turned it on. A holographic star map appeared in the air showing 17 star systems. Lisa explained that these were the systems the Krathix had conquered. Over 100 billion intelligent beings had been enslaved or killed. The Krathix Empire was built on fear and violence. Zrathok challenged her. He said humans were no different. He had looked up human history. Humans had fought wars against each other for thousands of years. They destroyed entire cities and killed millions. Humans were predators just like the Krathix. Lisa nodded slowly. She agreed that he was right. Humans were predators by evolution. But humans had learned something the Krathiks had not learned yet. True strength was not about dominating the weak. Real strength was about protecting them. She changed the hologram to show images from human history. Yes, there were wars and destruction, but there were also hospitals, schools, and organizations that helped people. She showed him documents about human rights, laws against war crimes, and agreements about treating prisoners with dignity. She showed humanity's long, painful journey from tribal warfare to global cooperation. Lisa continued explaining. Humans were like the Krathiks once. They thought might made right. They conquered, enslaved, and destroyed, and humans almost wiped themselves out completely because of it. They learned that a civilization built on fear and violence cannot last forever. Eventually, the oppressed rise up. Eventually, you meet someone stronger, and then you become the prey. Zrathok was silent, his golden eyes studying the images of human history. Lisa explained that the galaxy was changing. The peaceful species that the Krathiks had been attacking were not alone anymore. Humanity was here now with a different philosophy. Humans believed in defending those who could not defend themselves. They believed in giving everyone a chance to live in peace. Zrathok asked what would happen if the Krathiks refused. What if they continued conquering as they always had? Lisa's expression became hard and cold. She said the Krathiks would learn why Earth was classified as a Level 9 hazard world. They would learn why humans had spent 10,000 years perfecting warfare. The Krathiks could learn that humans could be protectors or they could be nightmares. The choice belonged to the Krathiks. Lisa stepped closer, so close that the Krathiks guards became nervous. She said she had studied the Krathiks species. They respected strength. Fine. Humans had shown their strength in battle, but now humans were offering something more valuable than conquest. They were offering the Krathiks a chance to evolve, to join the galactic community not as predators but as equals. Zrathok asked quietly what would happen to the Krathiks Empire. Lisa said flatly that it must be dissolved. The species they enslaved must be freed. The Krathiks must make up for their crimes. It would not be easy or quick. But humanity would help them through the change. Humans had done it themselves. They could guide the Krathiks. Zrathok asked what would happen if they refused this offer. Lisa smiled coldly. She said that every time the Krathiks attacked a defenseless species, humanity would be there. Every colony ship they threatened, humans would defend. Every world they tried to conquer, humans would liberate. Humans would make it economically and militarily impossible for the Krathiks to continue expanding. Eventually, the Krathiks people would overthrow their own leaders because humans had made peace more profitable than war. Zrathok stared at this small human female who stood before him without any fear. She was offering him a choice between evolution and extinction. In his long life, he had conquered countless species. None had ever spoken to him this way. None had ever defeated him so completely and then offered mercy instead of destruction. Zrathok said he needed to talk with the Dominion High Council. Lisa replied that he had 48 hours. After that, humans would start liberating the Krathiks' conquered worlds whether the Krathiks liked it or not. One way or another, the Krathiks' empire was ending. They could either guide that change or be swept away by it. Back on the Endeavour, Admiral Hayes watched a recording of the diplomatic meeting with satisfaction. Her first officer asked if she thought the Krathiks would accept the terms. He said that predator species respected strength. Humans had shown the Krathiks they could not win a military fight. Now humans were offering them a way forward. It was more mercy than they deserved, but it was the right thing to do. Hayes agreed, but ordered the fleet to stay on high alert. If the Krathiks decided to fight instead of negotiate, humans needed to be ready to back up their words with action. Meanwhile, repair crews worked day and night on the Harmonious Dawn. The Velen had never seen anything like human damage control teams. Marines in powered armor carried equipment that weighed tons as if it weighed nothing. Engineers worked in the vacuum of space without suits, protected by their armor's life support systems. Medical teams treated injuries with trauma care techniques that peaceful species had never needed to develop. Captain Mira watched in amazement as a human named Lieutenant Andy Cooper welded a hull breach closed with his armored hands. His suit protected him from the heat and the vacuum of space. When he finished, he noticed her watching and gave her a thumbs-up gesture. Mira told the human medical officer that humans were incredible. Dr. Karen Phillips smiled while treating Velen injuries. She said they were just doing their jobs. Though she admitted that Velen biology was fascinating, Their immune systems were amazing and much more efficient than human systems. Phelan basically never got infections. Captain Mira explained that this was because they evolved on a gentle world with no predators and no diseases. She said the Velen thought that made them advanced and peaceful. Dr. Karen corrected her gently. It made them different, not better or worse. Every species develops according to their environment. Phelan developed incredible social cooperation, emotional intelligence, and artistic expression. Humans developed the ability to survive in hell and fight their way to the top of the food chain. Neither way was superior. Mira said quietly that the human way kept them alive when the Velen way would have gotten them killed. Karen thought about that. She said maybe that was true. But the human way also led to countless wars, genocides, and atrocities. Humans killed billions of their own people before they learned to cooperate. The Velen way never required that bloody education. In a fair universe, species like the Velen should be able to live in peace. Humans were just trying to make sure that happened. As the 48-hour deadline approached, the galaxy watched and waited. The Krathix Dominion faced a choice that would define not just their own future, but the future of galactic civilization itself. The message from the Krathix High Council arrived 3 hours before the deadline ended. Admiral Hayes read it alone in her private office. Commander Greg Palmer stood waiting for orders, watching her face carefully. Hayes finally spoke. The Krathix had agreed to negotiate, but not with the military. They wanted to meet with Earth's government directly. They were calling for a summit on neutral ground. Greg said that was actually smart thinking. The Krathix wanted to see if all of humanity backed this position, or if it was just the military acting alone. Hayes ordered Greg to contact the Security Council on Earth. She also told him to prepare the fleet for extended deployment far from home. Until a treaty was signed, the human warships would maintain their position in Krathix space. 2 weeks later, the summit happened on Station Unity, a neutral space station operated by the Galactic Commerce Guild. The human delegation was led by Secretary General Linda Martinez. She brought diplomats, military advisors, and representatives from every major nation on Earth. The Krathix arrived with a massive delegation. Commander Zarathok was there, along with High Council members, military commanders, and civilian administrators. For a species that had never negotiated from weakness, this was something completely new. The negotiations lasted 6 brutal days. The Krathix demanded to keep some autonomy and protection from their former subjects who wanted revenge. They wanted time to restructure their society. The humans demanded that all hostile actions stop immediately. All enslaved species must be released. An independent tribunal must be established to judge Krathix war criminals. On the 4th day, tensions almost broke completely. Council leader Vexrath slammed his clawed hand on the negotiating table. He shouted that humans were asking them to dismantle everything the Krathix had built. This would make them vulnerable to species that hated them. He said this was not peace but surrender. Secretary Martinez met his angry glare calmly. She agreed that it was not fair. The species the Krathix enslaved deserved justice, not just freedom. They deserved to see the Krathix punished for generations of oppression, but humanity was also offering something unprecedented. The Krathix would get a chance to survive. Humans would protect them from revenge attacks during the transition. Humans would help rebuild the Krathix economy on ethical foundations. Humans would even help them integrate into the galactic community as equals. Vexrath demanded to know why. Why would humans do this for their enemies? Martinez replied quietly that the alternative was genocide. If humans simply destroyed the Krathix Dominion and left, the former subjects would hunt down every last Krathix in the galaxy. Humans had seen it in their own history, cycles of revenge that continued for generations. They were trying to break that cycle now. Lisa Chen, present as a military advisor, added more information. She said humans were not naive. They knew some Krathix would resist this change. That was why the treaty included enforcement provisions. Human peacekeeping forces would be stationed in former Dominion space for 50 years. They would ensure compliance and protect both the liberated species and Krathix civilians from each other. Vexrath repeated the number. 50 years. He called it an occupation. Martinez corrected him. It was a transition period. During those years, humans would help the Krathix build a sustainable, peaceful civilization. At the end of 50 years, if the Krathix met all treaty requirements, human forces would withdraw completely. The final treaty was signed on the 6th day. The Krathix Empire would dissolve. All conquered species would be freed. War criminals would face justice. And humanity committed to a 50-year military presence to enforce the peace and protect all parties during the difficult transition. As delegates left the station, Commander Zrathok approached Admiral Hayes privately. He said humans had bound their species to half a century of burden, maintaining fleets far from their homeworld, protecting species that were not their own, receiving no payment or resources in return. Why would they do this? Hayes thought carefully about her answer. She said it was the right thing to do, and because humans remembered what it was like when nobody helped them, when they were destroying themselves and there was nobody to stop the killing. Humans had to learn everything the hard way through countless wars and unimaginable suffering. If they could help other species avoid that pain, they would. Zrathok said humans were strange. Deadly and merciful in equal measure, Hayes replied with a slight smile that humans were complicated. They contained contradictions. Implementation of the treaty began immediately. Human fleets deployed to 17 star systems, establishing peacekeeping zones. The liberated species reacted with mixed emotions. Some felt joy and disbelief. Others felt fury. Many wanted immediate revenge on the Krathix. Human forces had to physically intervene dozens of times to prevent massacres. On the former Krathix colony world of Draxnor, Captain Daniel Wright found himself in an uncomfortable position. He was defending Krathix civilians from an angry mob of liberated Valen who wanted blood. Daniel ordered the mob to stand down. His Marines formed a barrier between the two groups. He said he understood their anger, but this was not justice. This was revenge. A Velen male named Kel shouted that the Krathix had enslaved them and killed their families. Now humans were protecting the Krathix. Daniel replied firmly that these were civilians. Not soldiers, not administrators, not the ones who enslaved anyone. These were shopkeepers, farmers, and children. Innocent people who happened to be the same species as their oppressors. Kel screamed that there were no innocent Krathix. Daniel stepped forward and removed his helmet so Kel could see his face. He said yes, there were innocent Krathix, just like there were innocent Germans after World War II, innocent Japanese after their empire fell, innocent Russians after the Soviet Union collapsed. Every species had civilians who just wanted to live their lives. If you killed them, you became exactly what they had been. The standoff lasted hours. Finally, the Valen backed down. Similar scenes played out across the former Dominion space. Human forces found themselves protecting the very species that had been their enemy. They were enforcing a peace that few on either side actually wanted. Back on Earth, the cost of the peacekeeping operation became a major political issue. Senator James Crawford stood in the World Congress arguing against continued deployment. He said Earth was spending trillions maintaining fleets in distant systems while they had problems at home. Humans had made their point and shown their strength. It was time to bring the forces home. Senator Michelle Roberts argued back. She said humanity made a commitment. They promised 50 years of peacekeeping to ensure lasting peace. If they abandoned that promise now, they would prove they were no different from the Krathix. They would show they were willing to use force but unwilling to do the hard work of building something better. The debate was fierce, but ultimately humanity held to its commitment. The fleets remained at their posts far from Earth. The peacekeepers stayed on duty, and slowly, painfully, the former Dominion space began to heal. 5 years into the occupation, something remarkable happened. The first mixed Krathix-Valen settlement was established on a frontier world. Farmers from both species worked side by side. 10 years in, the first Krathix representative was elected to the Galactic Council. 20 years in, former enemies began to trade with each other, to cooperate on projects and even to form friendships. The galaxy learned that humanity's greatest strength was not their military might or advanced technology. It was their stubborn refusal to accept that peace was impossible. They had learned through their own bloody history that enemies could become allies. The cycle of violence could be broken. A better future was possible if you were willing to fight for it. 25 years had passed since the Krathix Treaty was signed. Captain Nicole Barnes stood on the bridge of the peacekeeping station above Draxnor, watching the planet slowly spin below. The world looked completely different from when she first arrived. Cities that used to be divided by walls now showed mixed architecture. Krathix angular buildings stood next to Velen organic designs that looked like they had grown from the ground. Her communications officer announced a patrol report from Sector 7. Everything was quiet. The Joint Krathix-Valen Security Force had handled a dispute at the spaceport without any problems or violence. Nicole smiled at the news. Joint security forces made of former enemies working together. 5 years ago, that would have been impossible. Now it was routine. She acknowledged the report and told them human backup was available if needed, but they would not need help. Not anymore. The real work was not being done by human peacekeepers. It was being done by the people of these worlds themselves. They were learning to coexist, to forgive past crimes, and to build something new together. On Earth, Admiral Hayes was now retired and her hair had turned completely gray. She gave a lecture at the Naval War College to young officers who wanted to learn from her experience. The auditorium was full of eager faces wanting to hear from the woman who led humanity's first major military intervention in alien affairs. Hayes told them that the Krathix situation taught humanity a fundamental lesson. Military force was only useful if it served a greater purpose. Humans could have destroyed the Krathix fleet that day. They could have bombed their worlds from orbit, enslaved their people, or taken revenge for the millions the Krathix had killed. Instead, they chose a harder path. They chose to use their strength to create peace rather than impose dominance. A young lieutenant raised her hand with a question. She asked about the cost. 50 years of deployment, trillions in resources, thousands of personnel tied up in peacekeeping duties. Was it really worth it? Hayes nodded at the honest question. She told the class to walk with her. She led them to a large window overlooking Earth. The planet sparkled below them. Cities glowed in the darkness. Orbital platforms hummed with activity and commerce. Hayes told them to look at their world carefully. 400 years ago, Earth was divided into hundreds of nations that were constantly at war. 200 years ago, humans nearly destroyed themselves with nuclear weapons. 100 years ago, they were still fighting over resources, territory, and ideology. What changed? She turned to face the students. Humanity changed. They decided that their strength would be used for protection, not conquest. Their technology would serve life, not death. Their legacy would be peace, not domination. The Krathix intervention was expensive, yes, but it established humanity's role in the galaxy. Humans were not conquerors. They were not exploiters. They were protectors. Across the galaxy, that protection was being tested again. A distress call came from Sector 9, a resource-rich region. The Vorash clans were there. They were an aggressive trader species that used economic warfare and mercenary forces to seize valuable assets from weaker species. Commander Jake Morrison, now captain of the advanced cruiser Sentinel, responded to the call. The Vorash had blockaded a mining colony operated by the gentle Lumarian species. They were demanding ownership of the mineral rights. If the Lumarians refused, the Vorash would cut off all trade and essentially starve the colony. Jake arrived with a small task force and immediately opened communications with the Vorash fleet commander. He identified himself and ordered them to lift the blockade immediately. The Vorash commander was an insectoid being named Chixral. She clicked her mandibles in what might have been amusement. She said Earth had no authority in this region. This was a commercial dispute, not a military matter. Jake replied that the Vorash were using military force to threaten civilians. That made it his business. He gave them 1 hour to withdraw. Chixral asked what would happen if they refused. Would humans start another war? Jake pulled up historical records showing humanity's interventions over the past 25 years. He told her they did not start wars. They ended them. He suggested she ask the Krathix about what happened when species decided to prey on the weak, thinking humanity would not notice or care. Every time humans had proven them wrong, Jake leaned forward toward the screen. He explained what would happen next. The Vorash would withdraw. The Lumarians would keep their mining rights, and the Vorash would negotiate fair trade terms under galactic law. Or humans would add the Vorash clans to the very long list of groups who learned not to test human resolve. The Vorash withdrew their blockade. Word was spreading through the galaxy. Humanity's commitment to protecting the vulnerable was not a temporary policy or political stance. It was a fundamental part of who they had become as a species, but not every intervention was successful. On the distant colony of Epsilon Ceti, a civil war erupted between two factions of the native Tellarian species. Human peacekeepers tried to mediate the conflict. Both sides saw the humans as foreign invaders and oppressors. Despite humanity's best efforts, Thousands died before a fragile ceasefire was finally negotiated. Commander Lisa Chen, now serving as an ambassador, gave a difficult report to the Galactic Council. She explained that they needed to acknowledge the limits of what military force could achieve. Humans could stop invasions, protect refugees, and enforce peace between willing parties, but they could not force species to stop fighting if both sides were determined to destroy each other. Some conflicts had to be resolved from within. The Tellarian crisis led to changes in human intervention policy. The Compact of Intervention was signed by Earth and 37 other species. It established clear rules for when and how military force could be used to protect civilians. The Compact was not perfect, but it was a framework built on hard lessons learned through experience. 50 years after the original Krathix Treaty, as promised, human peacekeeping forces began withdrawing from former Dominion space. The ceremony on Draxnor was attended by thousands. Krathix and Valen stood side by side in the crowd watching together. Former Commander Zrathok was now an elderly statesman. He addressed the assembled crowd with a voice that shook slightly with age. He said that half a century ago the Krathix believed strength meant dominance. The humans taught them that true strength meant using power to protect, not to conquer. Humans had kept them safe while they learned to live in peace. They showed the Krathix a better way to exist. He turned to face the human delegation, led by Secretary General Marcus Cole. Zrathok said humans were finally leaving as they always promised they would. They kept their word about everything, all of it. The Krathix owed them eternal gratitude. Secretary Cole smiled warmly. He said humans did not do this for gratitude. They did it because it was right. But humans were not really leaving. They were just changing the relationship. From peacekeepers to partners. From protectors to friends. The withdrawal ceremony was broadcast across the entire galaxy. Species that once feared humanity's military might now understood what that power actually meant. Earth had proven that a Deathworld species forged in violence and hardship could choose a different path. They could be more than predators or conquerors. They could be guardians of peace. In her retirement home overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Admiral Catherine Hayes watched the broadcast with tears in her eyes. Beside her sat Captain Mira, the Valen who had sent that desperate distress call so many years ago. They had become close friends over the decades, meeting regularly to talk and remember. Mira said softly that humans had changed everything. That day when Earth answered the Valen call for help, it changed the entire galaxy forever. Hayes shook her head gently. She said they just did what anyone should have done. They helped people who needed help, but Mira pointed out that nobody else did help. Dozens of species received the Valen distress call. Only humanity answered. Only Earth sent its ships, risked its people, and spent its resources. Why? Hayes was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and orange. She finally answered. Because humans knew what it felt like to need help. Because they spent 10,000 years destroying each other and finally learned there was a better way. Because they came from a world that tried to kill them every single day. And it made them strong, yes, but it also made them understand the value of life. The years continued to pass and humanity's reputation in the galaxy grew stronger. What started with one desperate distress call had become something much larger. Earth was no longer just another species among thousands. They had become the guardians that the peaceful civilizations could call upon when violence threatened their existence. Commander Jake Morrison, now an admiral himself, sat in his office on Mars Colony reviewing reports from across known space. Human peacekeeping forces were deployed in 12 different sectors. Some missions were large operations like the Krathix occupation had been. Others were small observer teams monitoring ceasefire agreements or protecting refugee convoys. His assistant brought in the latest request. The Palmarian Confederacy was asking for human help. A pirate fleet had been raiding their outer colonies for months. The Palmarian security forces were not equipped for military operations. They were police officers trying to fight organized criminals with warships. Jake approved the deployment immediately. He sent a message to Captain Ellen Price, commander of the destroyer squadron stationed near Palmarian space. Within hours, 4 human warships were on their way. The pirates would learn the same lesson that so many others had learned. When you preyed on the innocent, humanity would come for you. On the former Krathix homeworld, now simply called Kratha, a memorial was being constructed. It would honor all the species who suffered under Dominion rule. Former enemies worked together on the project. Krathic stonemasons worked alongside Velan artists. The memorial would show the names of every known victim, over 100 billion individuals who died during the Empire's expansion. Ambassador Lisa Chen attended the dedication ceremony. She was older now, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes still held the same sharp intelligence. She stood beside Zrathok, who was now very old and moved slowly with the help of a walking device. Zrathok spoke to the assembled crowd. He said the memorial was a promise. The Krathics would never forget what they had done. They would never forget the price of their violence. And they would never forget that humanity gave them a chance to change when they deserved only destruction. Lisa placed a hand on his shoulder gently. She said the memorial was not just about remembering the past. It was about building a better future. Every species had capacity for both good and evil. What mattered was which path they chose. Back on Earth, young people grew up hearing stories about the Great Intervention, how humanity answered the call and saved the Velan, how they defeated the mighty Krathic's empire without destroying it, how they spent 50 years helping former enemies learn to live in peace. These stories became part of human culture, taught in schools and celebrated in art and music. But not everyone agreed with the interventionist policy. Some politicians argued that Earth should focus on its own interests. Senator Richard Blake spoke passionately in the World Congress. He said humanity had spent enormous resources helping aliens for 75 years. Meanwhile, there were still problems on Earth that needed attention and funding. Senator Maria Santos responded just as passionately. She reminded everyone why humans intervened in the first place, because it was right. Because the strong had a duty to protect the weak. Because humanity had learned through bitter experience that violence unchecked only created more violence. The resources spent on peacekeeping were not wasted. They were an investment in a safer, more stable galaxy. The debate continued as it always did in a democracy. But the policy remained unchanged. Humanity would continue to answer distress calls. They would continue to protect those who could not protect themselves. On Station Unity, now expanded into a major diplomatic hub, the Galactic Council met to discuss a new proposal. The Velan delegate stood to speak. She proposed the creation of a permanent galactic defense force, modeled on human peacekeeping operations, but including volunteers from all species. The proposal generated immediate discussion. Some species worried about creating a military force with authority over sovereign worlds. Others argued it was necessary to prevent future atrocities. The debate lasted weeks. Finally, a compromise was reached. The Galactic Defense Force would be created, but with strict limitations. It could only deploy with approval from the Galactic Council. It could only intervene in cases of genocide, slavery, or attacks on civilians, and humanity would train and lead the force for its first 20 years. Admiral Nicole Barnes, now one of the most senior officers in Earth's fleet, was chosen to command the new force. She stood before the Galactic Council and took an oath to defend all species, to use force only when necessary, and to always protect the innocent above all else. The first GDF mission came quickly. A species called the Torvin had discovered valuable minerals on an uninhabited moon, but another species, the Krell, claimed the moon belonged to them based on ancient territorial charts. Both sides were mobilizing military forces. Barnes took the GDF fleet to the disputed moon and established a neutral zone. She invited both sides to negotiate while her ships prevented any violence. The negotiations took months, but eventually a compromise was reached. The moon would be jointly administered, with both species sharing the mineral wealth. It was a small victory, but it proved the concept worked. Military force used not to conquer, but to create space for diplomacy and peaceful resolution. Admiral Hayes, now very elderly, watched these developments from her retirement home. Captain Mira still visited regularly. They had become like family over the decades, bound by the crisis that brought them together so long ago. Mira asked Hayes if she ever imagined how much would change from answering one distress call. Hayes admitted she had not. She thought they would save one ship, maybe make one enemy, and that would be the end of it. She never imagined it would reshape galactic civilization. But Mira said that was exactly what happened. Before humans arrived, the galaxy accepted that the strong dominated the weak. It was just the way things were. Peaceful species built their civilizations and hoped they would not be noticed by predators. Military species conquered and enslaved without consequence. Humans changed that fundamental equation. They proved that strength could serve justice instead of oppression. They showed that protecting the weak was not weakness but the highest form of strength, and they backed up their ideals with action again and again, no matter the cost. Hayes looked out at the ocean, watching the waves crash against the shore. She thought about all the young men and women who served on those peacekeeping missions. Some had died far from home, protecting people they never met. But their sacrifice meant something. It meant that somewhere in the galaxy, families were safe. Children could grow up in peace. Entire species had futures they would not have had otherwise. She turned to Mira and spoke quietly. Humans were Deathworlders, she said. They evolved in hell, learning to be predators and survivors. For most of their history, they used that strength to hurt each other. War after war, atrocity after atrocity, until they nearly destroyed themselves completely. But they learned. They learned that their strength had another purpose. They could use it to protect instead of destroy, to build instead of conquer, to create peace instead of war. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy, not their weapons or ships or technology. It was their choice to be better than their nature demanded. As the sun set on Earth, it rose on 1,000 worlds where the strong protected the weak. Where predator species learned to live in peace with their former prey. Where refugees knew that if they sent a distress call, someone would answer. The galaxy was not perfect. There was still violence, still injustice, still species who chose oppression over cooperation. But now there was also hope. Hope that the strong could be held accountable. Hope that the weak could be protected. Hope that a better future was possible. All because humanity heard a desperate call for help in the darkness of space and decided to answer. All because they chose to be guardians instead of conquerors. All because a species from a death world proved that where you came from mattered less than who you chose to become. The legacy of that choice would echo through the stars for generations to come. The SOS that sparked humanity's deadliest fleet had become something greater than anyone imagined. It had become a promise that in the vast dark galaxy, the innocent would never be alone. Someone would always answer the call. Someone would always come to help. Humanity would always be there, standing between the predators and their prey, using their strength not for domination but for protection. And slowly, one crisis at a time, one intervention at a time, they were building a galaxy where that protection would no longer be needed, where peace would be the rule, not the exception, where all species could live without fear. That was the dream. That was the goal, and humanity would keep working toward it for as long as it took, because that was who they had chosen to be. The guardians of the galaxy, the protectors of peace, the Deathworlders who learned that true strength meant using power to create life instead of taking it. And it all started with one distress call that humanity refused to ignore.